Hello, welcome back to the Godfo Universe podcast. This is Josh Adams. I'm here with co-creator of the Godfo Universe, Dan Evans, just like usual. And we're going to talk some Father's Day Godfo Universe in-world nonsense. So, happy Father's Day, Dan.
Yeah, I'm like the only one that gets to enjoy it, and I'm not enjoying it. I'm laid up to everybody that's listening, but it's fine. Like I'm at home at least, but it's just not fun.
Dan's an invalid because his knees suck.
Yeah, I got a problem with my joints apparently. Like all my joints are just kind of bad and stuff's just popping out of nowhere. I'm like what's
Did
his
you
name?
just hit a bong?
Yeah, because all my joints are bad. I was about to actually say that. I was like, I'm like a Dr. Dre. All my joints are bad. You remember when Dr. Dre was like all against weed in like the first in the first NWA album, and then like he was like, "Nah, weed's great."
The Chronic, bro.
This is funny. It's like he used to have these songs that are about like how he didn't smoke weed, and then he released the Chronic. Oh man.
He wrote himself a prescription.
I'm the doctor. Man. But nah, I wanted to talk about, it's Father's Day, so let's talk about some fathers in comics and media and pop culture.
Absolutely.
Because it's not they're either, we'll get into it, but it's like they're either bad or they're absent.
Pretty much, man. It's like I sent you, we always talk about Evangelion on here because we're huge nerds for it. But the father of that anime and comic, manga, movies, there's a lot of different versions of it. But Gendo Ikari, man, worst father of the world history awards. The most cold, unloving, manipulative father that ever existed in any form of media, I think. Like, I challenge you to give a worse father than Gendo.
The dude from that one episode of Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh, that is a bad one. Ugh. Yeah, all right, so that's true. So for those of you that don't know the comparison, in Evangelion, the whole idea is that there are these giant mega robots, and they are piloted by teenagers, because of course they are. There's actually a lot of reasons why they are that I wouldn't begin to get into. It makes a lot of sense in the context of the show, but the leader, Gendo, is the leader of this, basically of the organization that creates and runs these mechas and uses them to fight against these aliens that are attacking what's left of the Earth. And his son, he has never been active in his son's life ever. And then he summons his son to come to Japan. And when he finally to that part of Japan, and when he finally shows up, he's thinking, oh, my dad loves me. My dad wants to have a relationship with me. And it's like, no, I just want you to get in this robot and go fight a giant monster.
He's like, yeah, he's like, I want to resurrect my dead wife at the cost of you.
And if you can't do that, I don't have any use for you. Like, there's literally like lines where he's like, if you can't do it, then just leave. I don't need you anymore. Yeah. Like, I have no use for you at all. But in Full Metal Alchemist, to explain that character that Dan's referencing, in that world, all magic is a matter of alchemy, and it's basically a matter of if you have the right materials and you can put the right amount of those different elements together, you can basically transmute it, turn it into something else if you know the formula to do it. And there's a character in the show who has this adorable little daughter that you get super attached to because she's so sweet. And she has this big, goofy dog, like furry dog that she loves. And like the dad is not very, like he's not present most of the time. So the dog really like is her family and like keeps her like company or whatever. And this dude, like in his pursuit of the alchemy and trying to reach his goal of bringing his wife back, he merges his daughter with the dog and creates this horrible monstrosity. It's the saddest, most depressing thing I've ever seen in my life. It's like it makes you sick to your stomach. It's so sad.
Yeah, because Edward.
So yeah, that day was even worse, maybe.
Because Edward wanted to kill him.
God, it's so sad.
Yeah, he's the worst anime dad.
God, he takes the cake. At least Gendo was gonna let Shinji go away and live his life, and he just was ambivalent to him. He didn't care. He didn't actively turn him into a dog creature.
His little Shinji life.
A Shinjitsu.
Listening to classical music on a tape player. But fathers aren't really a big thing in pop culture, especially like hero stories for some reason. Because I was rewatching Dune today, and of course that's one of like the greatest stories of like a father and a son.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, this doesn't really happen a lot. Like, especially a good example of a father. And somebody brought this to my attention years ago that we went from shows called Father Knows Best to Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, that role of the patriarch has been diminished, if not outright abolished.
Yeah, the destruction of the father figure is a big part of culture now. And has been, like you said, since the 70s, 60s and 70s.
Yeah, 60s counterculture revolution kind of destroyed a lot of that.
Yeah. And, when you think about it in comics and in, like, genre media, a lot of times what we get more of is, sympathy-wise, is the single mother.
Yeah.
Or at least the more present mother, the absent or at least emotionally absent father figure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that comes down to when you're telling a hero's journey kind of story, a coming of age young man coming into power, becoming a hero story. Sons want to protect their mothers, right? Sons feel like I'm a man if I can protect my mom. Whereas a lot of times, this goes back,
emulating the father that way.
Right. You're emulating the father, or, to go Freudian with it, you feel like I have got to defeat my father. And so many stories in comics and sci-fi fantasy are about, my father is the villain. That's Darth Vader.
Yes,
right?
I was going to say Star Wars perfected that, but even that wasn't defeat, it was redeem.
Right.
Which is what made it so unique.
It turned that trope kind of on its head a little bit there at the end. But through Empire Strikes Back, at the end of that movie and most of Return of the Jedi, it's like my father is the enemy, the enemy.
Yeah.
He's bad news, and that's something that's they've doubled down on. And I didn't care for the show. I know you didn't either, and I didn't ever read the book. But Invincible, the whole idea of Omni Man, and the way that's such a brutal father figure. If we look at My Hero Academia, the way they handle Endeavor and his son, like it's just this brutal, harsh, unloving figure. Even if he's not an outright villain, there's still. Typically, fatherhood is seen as a negative. There's a few examples of the opposite, and I definitely want to get into a couple of those.
Yeah.
But you're right. They are few and far between actual good father figures particularly in comics and anime and things like that.
Yeah, or if you do see it, and I hate to say this, but it's kind of like an effeminate father. It's a guy that isn't tough, and it's always like, he seems more like a mom. He usually is the one taking care of the home. The mom's usually working. Whenever you see it in these kind of portrayals, and he's always kind, compassionate, which are great traits, but he's harmless. Which means he's not really, good. Because if you're harmless, you're not really good. You're just kind of there.
You're just not bad.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned Dune, and I agree with you. And I thought the most recent movie, did a really good job of showing it that the Atreides family, and it's interesting. The dynamics are interesting because his mother is not a duchess, and like the Duke is his father. Duke Leto is his father.
Yeah.
And Paul, Paul loves both his parents, but
they're not married.
it's a different that. Yeah, they're not married. She's not like a political figure. She's more of a consort, and it's actually a kind of that she wouldn't marry the Duke because it would weaken his political power in a way to be married to her, which is
and it's kind of they did actually marry for love in the sense because I'm not to go off on this tangent of Dune, but it's an interesting thing because they both could defeat the other one politically because she was put there by the Bene Gesserit to take from the Duke what they could.
Yeah. And she didn't.
And he would basically got her so he wouldn't have to marry, like, and actually could consolidate his power and not have to be with another house and all that kind of stuff. But they ended up loving each other so much that she bred him a son when the Bene Gesserit wanted a daughter. And that was the ultimate act that proved her love to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, the way his relationship with his son is characterized within the book, and especially in the most recent movie, there's so much warmth between father and son, and so much respect. Yeah, it was so much respect, and it's so clear that the Duke is trying to raise the son to know how to walk as a man. And it's funny that when things go south in that story, when things get when the Harkonnens come in and they do their the betrayal of the Duke happens and all of this, when Paul ends up on the run with his mother, making decisions as they come in contact with the Fremen, his mother tries to, in some ways, she tries to kind of exert her will on her son.
She tries to mother him.
As mothers do. Yeah, as she tries to mother him. And you can clearly see that every lesson the Duke instilled in him of how to lead, how to be a man, how to make a decision, he does not allow his mother to mother him out of what he needs to do, out of the right choices. Like, he really does step into the role his father prepared him for, and it's admirable.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, that's people have always had that, or certain people have always had a problem with Dune for its portrayal of the masculine and the feminine so well, and that's what makes it so good and so real, is because it actually understood it and did it so well. But yeah, his mother protects him, and she's brilliant at that, and she's adept at it. But all of her stuff is built on deception. Every single one of her powers is built on deception and manipulation, and everything that actually gets them in it. But everything that lets them thrive and makes him become a man is what his dad taught him, which is loyalty, honesty, openness, and basically strength of leadership. And of course, that's what she fears, and you see that when he becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, when he tries to show her what he is, she's terrified, and that's the whole thing. Is none of the Bene Gesserit, none of the women could ever face what he faces, and see what he sees and makes the decisions he makes, and that's the whole thing. I'm not going to go off into a 2-hour rant on how awesome Dune is. But,
yeah, not today anyway.
Yeah, but if you mean that idea, Frank Herbert, he nailed every single idea he tried to articulate. He did it perfectly. That's a perfect book that surpasses literature, in my opinion. It fits.
Yeah, it's a transcendent book. It really truly is.
To me, it's like the Iliad. It's on par 100%. With the Iliad or Dante.
Yeah, 100%.
But anyway, but yeah, it's not something we tried to do going in with the Godfather universe, but it's like I remember having a conversation with you, like I do want to explore mothers and fathers and actually do that, because it's so easy to just have a character that has no family, because that's how every character has to be, or they have a mother.
Well, and one of the things that, and I do have a couple other examples I'd like to discuss, but within the Godfrey universe, one of the things that you hit that bong again.
No, I'm drinking. I have some lime water. I'm drinking.
I know, I know. It just sounds funny. Um, One of the things I think is interesting about the way we're approaching fatherhood in our book is that a lot of the fathers in the Godfather universe are surrogate fathers in the sense that they're not their blood relative. They have sort of taken in a lot of cases, at least in the Biophile era
Mm-hmm.
and in the Black Star era, we have father figures who have taken a daughter under their wing, and there is a certain adoration of this daughter to father figure, even though the fathers themselves may not actually have the best interest for these girls, in mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting dynamic to put the surrogate father figure with the younger girl that sees this person as like a dad figure, but they're not really nurturing them and protecting them like we typically see with those tropes.
Yeah, and one reason I did that in a lot of the writing is, first of all, I got really tired of seeing female characters written, quite frankly, the way they've been written for like 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when in that dynamic of a male mentor, like it's like people don't know how men or women are,
Yeah.
if we're being honest. And we have some like male and male mentorship and relationships, and I'm gonna say this, like I'm not gonna go off on a tangent, but we've discussed this before. If I don't think kids are reading it anymore in school, but Treasure Island has probably the one of the best male mentorship relationships ever between, I think it's Jack, is that his name?
Yeah.
Jack and
Yeah.
Long John Silver.
Yeah, Long John Silver. And it's so good and it's so rich because it isn't one dynamic at play. It's a very complex relationship because Long John Silver is a villain.
Yeah, he's a bad guy.
He's a bad guy, but he genuinely does care for Jack and want to teach him. Like Jack both fears him and admires him,
and overcomes him.
Yeah,
in the right way, in the correct, which is what Long John Silver really wanted in some way.
Yeah, it's such a rich, complex relationship that understands it understands male relations well.
Yeah,
and it another example of that that I like. I'm a really big fan of, particularly the original series, but I like the remake too, of an anime called The Guyver.
Oh yeah.
And The Guyver, the father-son relationship in that, the main character is Sho Fukamachi. He's a kind of I wouldn't call him a wimp. He's a normal high school kid. He's not ridiculous, super popular or anything, but I mean, he's just a normal guy. He ends up with a very powerful suit of organic alien armor, and by having it, which he didn't mean to have, it just happened. But because he's bonded with it, now there's this whole conspiracy theory and this whole like hidden organization of monsters that are after him. And the father-son relationship in that show, because he lives with his dad. The mother has died when he was young, so he's raised by his father. And the way they portray it is one of the most believable, realistic ways I've seen the single father-son relationship play out.
Mm-hmm.
They both kind of, their ships passing in the night a little bit in the show. Like, the son will maybe fix dinner and the dad will maybe wash dishes. They eat together when they have a chance. Dad goes to work, son goes to school.
Yeah.
And they have time together, and they get along fine, but they also don't open up to one another well.
They're not playing catch.
Yeah, and it's very believable. They care about each other, but they don't really reach out. So like the son doesn't go to him and say, "Hey, Dad, look, all this crazy stuff is happening to me right now." But at the same time, the father, if he knew, would do anything for that son.
Yeah, I
and
mean, and even the show The Boys did that well with Huey and his dad.
yeah, yeah.
His dad's kind of weak and cowardly until there's a threat, and he's like, "No, like, don't like let me die, kill me, not my son." You know,
Well, and
he's
see,
willing to die for his kid.
right, and in Guyver, it's they realize that like the organization that's after the Guyver, they realize that he has a father, and they actually capture the father. The son goes to rescue him, and he goes through hell to get him back, and then on the way home with him after rescuing him, he finds out that his father, they had experimented on him, turned him into a creature that was specifically designed to be able to kill him,
Mm.
and that the father, once he transforms, has no control over that, and he ends up having like killing his own father because like he gets so badly injured that the armor takes over
Mm.
and kind of goes into like a
Self-defense.
self-defense, autopilot kind of mode, and he has to watch himself kill his own father, and it's so heartbreaking because you realize there's so much unsaid between them
Yeah.
that's never going to be said. And that hit me hard because like just being honest, like when I was younger, I have a great relationship with my father. In fact, I spent great time with him today. But when I was in middle school and high school, my dad got up at 4 in the morning to go to work, and he got home at 8. He ate dinner, he went to bed, and that was it. And the only time I spent time with him was on the weekends, and that was usually, all right, you got to get out in the yard, rake the ditch bank or cut the grass, help me do this. It was, you got to, all right, work hard. And we had good times together. I'm not saying that there weren't any good memories, because there were. He was a good father, a very good father, but there were several years where there was a lot of resentment. And if I had lost my father in that season of my life, it would have devastated me.
Yeah.
Well, to have so much unsaid.
And with the Guyver, the guilt of he wasn't strong enough. Of course, the emotional gut that you're fighting your dad, and you don't want to do anything, but it's like, had you accepted it in the moment and been strong enough, the suit wouldn't have had to take over.
Yeah.
And not to say that, not to say it's better, but he may be able to save him, or he may have been the one that did it instead of the suit.
Yeah.
That's not better, but it kind of is.
You see, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's a father-son relationship. I think the way you write that best is to be honest and realistic about the way men can tend to be, and the baggage that comes with that. Well, and it's different baggage for daughters, but it's just as important and just as vivid in people's lives. It's like there's so many girls that have an enormous emotional wound, and it's from their fathers.
Yeah, and what's so strange is, well, it's not strange because it's known, but I mean statistically, the safest place for any child is with their father.
Yeah.
Like in a married situation, divorced, or single situation, more than a single mom, they're actually safer with their dad. And usually that's because a single mom gets with some guy, and then they abuse the child because it's not their child.
Yep.
And people have forgotten that. And the reason, like the Godfrey universe, the reason we use it kind of like a more like daughter and father relationship or surrogate father relationship is because it's a cool character study with a way to do things, because female characters are really fun to write. And again, I have a chip on my shoulder for how they've been written. But also, I mean, that's the state of a broken world. You don't have the father to son passage and foundation of society, and that's why society is broken and falling apart. And a lot of the eras that we're exploring in the Godfrey universe are broken worlds.
Yeah,
and that's a reflection of that.
Like, we've talked before about our timeline, and that the last segment of our timeline is where the novels about the Black Star happen. and one of our main characters in that world, like at least in the first book, our point of view character kind of is a young man named Garo, who all of the driving forces in his childhood leading up to the person he is he's been controlled by very tough and very
I mean, matriarchal society.
unnurturing mother figures.
Mm-hmm.
His whole life. That was what he was brought up in. And so like there isn't a good male figure in his life, and when he does encounter men, male figures, he really doesn't quite know how to take them or how to respond to them.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they know how to respond to him, and they immediately see him as a threat, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of our stories have that male-female clash, which is what a lot of stories are missing now. Or if they have anything, it's female dominating male.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Captain Marvel, some kind of feminist perspective or something. But there's good in both sides, and there's toxicity in both sides.
Yeah.
But it's been so long since that's actually been explored, or the toxic feminine is praised, and the good masculinity isn't shown at all. And you're just limiting yourself to that when the male, like the father-son dynamic, it's the cornerstone for good society and good story and good characters, but kind of the only way you get a good male.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah. Well, and there's been examples of that, of course, in literature and stuff, but I agree with you. It's been a while since we've seen that. I mean, if you look at fantasy, all of the best-selling fantasy novels of the longest, pretty much, like, you think about things like Game of Thrones or, just about throw a rock in the fantasy section and pick up a book, and the main character, if it's a male, the main character is a bastard.
Yeah, Jon Snow.
Always. Mm-hmm. It's always the, I don't know who my dad is, or my dad was a king, but he had me out of wedlock with somebody else, so I'm just kind of like a servant boy, or I'm the orphan bastard.
And I get that as an allegory, as an idea for manhood, of having to go out into the world and become a man. But and there is that idea that a boy can go and learn from other male examples that aren't his father.
Of course.
Yeah, it just takes longer, and it's usually worse, and you have to see.
But it's become a trope, and it's become a low-hanging fruit. It's just an easy way to make it edgy, grimdark.
Yeah, and they want the character to not have any attachments.
Mm-hmm.
And to just leave the family, or that's why the family either is non-existent or it dies.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to do that. Like, you really don't. It's one of the reasons why in the Black Star books, I had Garo and Bosba be cousins, whether they're cousins or not. But blood, it doesn't matter. That's how they see each other. And I was like, no, I want there to be a family relationship there, because I'm tired of the. Like,
and the dynamic between the two of them is such an interesting part of the story. How they interact with one another, how they see that, and how that dynamic changes throughout the story.
Yeah, the worst
as
thing,
he grows.
The thing that scares her the most is him becoming a man.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a real fear. That's a real feminine fear.
Mm-hmm.
But again, people don't really like to talk about that.
Well, and that's why, emasculation has been such a big part of so many different societies throughout history. The idea of being a eunuch, that if a man is going to be able to have a position of authority or power in a secular society, if you want to work in the palace, you got to trade your masculinity to do it. You've got to make yourself unthreatening. So if you emasculate yourself and you can no longer seduce the queen and the princesses, and you can't bear children, so you can't have a son that could someday be a threat to my throne, well,
Mm-hmm.
then you can serve. You can be a part of the society and have power. And then what happens is if we look at stories from those time periods and those cultures where eunuchs were involved in the palace life, so much of the time those eunuchs were manipulative, they were gossipers, they were spread the lies, they were poisoners, you know, they would set up
feminine.
rebellions.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to get at. It's feminine guile.
Yeah.
They trade their masculinity, and they, instead of being a physical threat, they have to become a threat to truth. They have to become manipulative. They have to become all these things that we typically associate with feminine villain.
Yeah, and that doesn't, and those wiles, or as you say, aren't necessarily bad, because
No.
and that's the thing, is we kind of show that side of things too, that we have characters who are female, and the only way they get by, even doing good, is through those means, because they know I can't fight a 6'4", 250 man one-on-one. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And that's what going to Biofal Kolga, that era, that's what she is kind of trying to teach her ward June a lot of, is and Boss, or not Boss, Kolga has a lot of masculine traits because she was raised by men, but she understands the difference, and she also understands that difference is what made her different.
She was raised by men who were brilliant but also incredibly flawed. So she could see their strengths, but she also saw, yes, they were strong, they were brutal in their own ways, but she also saw how blind they were.
Yeah, and it was a lot of it was their masculinity that made them that way. At least from her perspective, is they would make those kind of sacrifices that I wouldn't. They would do those kind of things that I wouldn't. Their blind ambition, and that's a sex difference.
Yeah.
And some of it she hates herself for not having, and some of it she hates them for not having on her end, And I don't know, it's a breath of fresh air to be able to talk about these things. And we had to make our own story to even do it, because it just seems like it's not there. Like I said, I think the best example we can do is go to Dune. I think Game of Thrones tried to do some of it, but at least the show kind of failed in it.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, Tolkien.
And the books will never be finished, so.
Yeah, right. Tolkien did it well with Galadriel, and then Amazon tried to ruin it by giving her a sword. And it's like, well, you just ruined who Galadriel is,
Yeah.
But yeah, all right, we have another era called Fall of the Great Kings, and that entire era is about this, and it's literally about masculinity being subverted. And because these men allowed it, and it leads to the destruction of entire kingdoms, and it's done by another male figure called the blind king.
Fallen.
Yeah, the fallen.
Yeah, the fallen or the blind king. Yeah, he's sort of the Satan figure of our books,
with a nice twist on it, because he's not actually. He is amorally evil. But he's not trying to win the souls of mankind. He's basically just out for revenge. Yeah. And yeah, that whole series is going to be just that, basically. The man's impetus and blindness to the feminine, while being his downfall.
Yeah, it's the idea of nothing could ever take me down because I have single-handedly brought down kingdoms, so what could possibly bring me down? Well, it doesn't take much.
Yeah. It's not what you think it's not going to be
it's come from a different way.
It's the same thing that took down David.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, and that's a great example too, if we wanted to get into fatherhood and stories. And if you're, like I said, I say this a lot, and I would encourage people, if they're writing or they're artists, it doesn't matter, to read old religious texts. I don't care if it's the Christian Bible or not, but I would strongly suggest it, because you're not going to find better ideas of these tropes anywhere, because these stories
it's the origin of so many of them.
Yeah, these stories are so old.
You look at David as a character and then eventually as a father figure. So, David, his own actual biological father, when he was
Jesse.
asked by the prophet Samuel, to bring out your sons because one of them, is going to be king. It doesn't even cross his father's mind that it could be David.
Yeah.
Like Samuel, the prophet, has to say, like, are these all your sons, or are none of these? Are there any more sons? He's, oh yeah, the runt's outside, the little one.
But and with that though, Jesse must have been a good father though, because David respected him so much that he did his job, his low job as shepherd, so well. You see what I'm saying?
Or it could have just been that he was a inwardly motivated young man. It's hard to say.
Yeah, you're right, but he seems.
The interesting thing is, like, once David is taken under the wing of King Saul, we don't see Jesse again.
Yeah.
And King Saul initially kind of steps in as what could be a father figure, and then he becomes a person who wants to chase down. He just sees David as a threat, and so he wants to kill David.
Yeah, he is the Oedipusal father.
Yeah, and he's the epitome of it. And
before Oedipus.
Yeah. And instead of being proud of David's accomplishments, he's jealous of them.
Yeah.
And by the time David himself is a father, he's actually a pretty terrible dad. Like he has constant upheaval within his own household, with his sons, and it's awful.
And I'm pretty sure when they chose Saul, God told the Israelites that the king had to be a husband of one wife.
Mm-hmm.
And David did not live up to that.
No, he didn't.
Saul broke it first, of course, because Saul was the first king. But that's where David's conflicts came from. Was his children were from different women, and that means different interests.
And all of them vying for control. All of them vying for the throne, to the point that his own sons are trying to literally stage a coup and take the throne from their dad. Like it's it's a sad thing.
I guess the reason I'm saying Jesse biblically, in the biblical timeline, is given praise through David and Christ, because he is the branch of Jesse. He's not spoken of in a bad way.
That's true.
But you're right. Like, but then again, it's like, hey, one of your sons. Like, well, no one would have thought it would be the youngest. That's just an aspect of your birth. But like you said, there's no real evidence. But anyway, David becomes a father. Saul becomes a surrogate father for David, and he kind of learns how not to be a king from him. And to be the man he doesn't want to be. And again, it's kind of like that Long John Silver and Jack dynamic, where he learns a lot. He's in his house, he sees it, but he's like, this man, if he had the opportunity, would kill me.
Yeah. Well, and what's really special about David, and I've talked about David before plenty of times with youth groups and things. I've preached sermons about David. David, even as a kid, even as a young man, David was a bloodthirsty young man.
Yeah.
He kills Goliath, the giant, and then he cuts his head off, and he carried that head around with him everywhere. He keeps it in his tent, like as a trophy. Mm-hmm. Like he's walking around just dragging it, and that's not normal behavior.
Yeah, even for then.
Even for then, that is bizarrely violent, blood-minded behavior.
And to his credit, though, he did believe it was a divine conquest.
Of course, of course he did. But
he was on against the Philistines.
Yeah. But then later on in David's life, we see there's a situation that arises when he's camped out with his soldiers, and he and his men have been on the outskirts of another man's land, and they've protected the workers that were working in that guy's fields. They've kind of guarded that area while they were camped out there. And when they need provisions and they send and ask the guy, hey, is there any food, anything that we can give? He sends back a very disrespectful, not just no, I'm not going to help you, but like it's a complete spit in the face for David. David's response is, take all of my men. I'm going down there. I'm going to kill every last human being in that place.
Take everything. And yes.
Yeah, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your men. I'm going to kill your animal. David's about to go scorch earth.
I'll even shoot his dog.
Yeah, he goes unforgiven, Clint Eastwood. And the only thing that saves him is this guy's wife that comes out and basically says, look, just like my husband's an idiot, please don't kill us. And then the dude dies, and David's like, all right, I'll marry your wife.
Yeah, takes everything
from
him.
Yeah, what I say all that to say this, because even later on when David wants to build a temple, God tells him, you're not building my temple.
Yeah.
You got way too much blood on your hands to build my temple. But there is one person in David's life that steps up at an impressionable time in his life, Jonathan, who's the son of King Saul, Jonathan, who would be heir to the throne. Jonathan knows, I would be the next one to be king.
Rival. Should be his greatest rival.
Yeah, it should be his greatest rival. And instead of seeing David, this young, bloodthirsty, violent kid, as a threat and as like you said, a rival, he sees him as somebody who has potential and who has been anointed by God. And he invests in David. He becomes a mentor-like figure for David. He loves David and invests in David. And the reality is David would have been probably turned out, or could have. He had the potential to turn out a very different kind of man because of those proclivities that he had. Mm-hmm. David could have been a much more brutal man than he ended up being had it not been for someone like Jonathan stepping in and showing him love and showing him companionship, showing him respect and loyalty and all of these things that every other person in his life kind of didn't.
And
because David's older.
And Jonathan
And
Jonathan being so loyal to his father too, to the point
mm-hmm.
of death, of dying beside him.
Yeah.
Though his father was trying to kill his best friend, and his father
mm-hmm.
had become a fool at that point and was leading them to disaster after disaster, he still stayed with him.
Yeah, he still honored his father.
Killed together.
Yeah, yeah, he was able to honor David and his father, and David just that's like the only good relationship almost in his life.
Yeah, he was the only person that kind of spoke light into him.
Yeah, because I mean, when you look at his own older brothers that he looked up to, his older brothers accused him of being lazy, accused him of being a liar, accused him of not doing his work.
Well, it's like this. It's the dynamics, and this is going into fatherhood, and manhood, especially manhood.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a painful truth.
Mm.
But you see the two types of men that men meet whenever when they're actually trying to be men, and that is men like, well, maybe three types. Men like Saul, who are jealous of your ambition, because it's what they used
fragile.
To have. Yeah, what they
fragile egos.
What they used to have, or what they could have, what they did have at one point. Usually older.
Yeah,
they're the kind of guys in businesses and churches that won't change, that won't listen, and they toxify everything, and they make things worse. And there's no getting rid of them because they're embedded in that system.
Yep.
And then you have guys like like David's mighty men.
Yep.
Like is it Joab?
He had several, but yeah, that was one of them, I think.
His main one, Joab. Men that see what you're doing and respect you and follow you and will follow you to the point of death, but they're not quite your friend.
Yeah.
And then you have Jonathan, who's a true friend. And the sad reality is Jonathan didn't last.
Yeah. And you may never, and the really sad part is you may never encounter a Jonathan in your life, unfortunately.
Yeah. And for those who
you may choose to be one in somebody else's life, but there's a lot of men, and there's an epidemic of this in people's life. It's endemic in our society that most young men do not have a male figure that they can look up to, that they can talk to, that they can ask questions of, and that they have are able to have respect for and from in their life. They just don't have that figure.
No, and that's why people like Andrew Tate exist.
And Jordan Peterson and others.
Well, yeah, one of those is a little different than the other. Like
what is?
Yeah,
but both are being demonized for telling men to be responsible and grow up and be masculine.
Yeah, well, one I would say the Tate kind I would say is more like the facade of manhood because it comes.
I agree.
It comes at the expense of women.
I agree.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is Joab, for those who don't know, Joab was loyal to David to the point of he would kill and die for David. But he is also, and something he did well was when Absalom, David's son, betrayed David and basically kicked him out of the palace and took over. Joab came to him and said, paraphrasing, "I know he's your son, but
Mm-hmm.
you are father of an entire nation now. You
Mm-hmm.
can't let this continue, and if you won't kill Absalom, I will." And
Mm-hmm.
it's to David's shame that Joab's the one that had to go hunt him down and kill him. And it
Mm-hmm.
was also Joab who later, when on his deathbed, David had to tell Solomon, "You have to kill this man," because
Mm-hmm.
Joab, is so he's so bent on my image of what he thinks I am and like what I mean to him that
Mm-hmm.
he didn't want Solomon to be king. He wanted, I forget the other one, David's
Yeah.
other son, and he said,
Yeah.
I'm making you king, Solomon, and you've got to kill this guy that's been loyal to me for our entire life."
Mm-hmm.
And but like I said, that's the kind of guy, like you become a man and you start working and you inspire, but the people even that work for you or that work with you could just be they like the idea or the ambition of you, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
understand you.
Yeah.
And those are that's not all of them. Those are like three different types of relationship that men actually, who when you want to be a man and actually be an agent in the world, that you meet.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's women, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a whole other thing.
And with what I'm saying, without fathers, I don't know how men are supposed to navigate that. Like, my gosh, like I was lucky to have one for
Yeah.
35 years.
I
I
mean,
don't
when
know.
you think about how many men in their 30s and 40s, if you ask them, do you have a friend? They have acquaintances, they got people that they work with, but there's very few of them can say that they have a friend.
Yeah,
Now that's sad.
it is, and it's I don't know. I think for whatever a male or female son or daughter, I think I could be wrong in this because I'm not a psychologist. It seems to me that like the mother, it is kind of like this idea of nurturing and taking care, and the father is like the world. Of
Mm.
like it's how his job is to present you with the reality of the world and
And
get you
prepare you
and
for it.
prepare you for it. And the mother
Yeah,
is his mother is there to help you prepare in another way, but
yeah.
in a more like
Well,
insular way.
yeah, well, and Jesus put it in an interesting way. He referred to himself. There's actually two things that he referred to himself as. He says, "I'm the door," and he says, "I'm the gate."
Hmm.
And fathers, that's what fathers are. Fathers keep you safe inside boundaries for a certain amount of time. But if you're going to go out into the world, your father is the gate that you pass through into the world.
Yeah,
Ideally.
yeah,
And that means in an ideal situation, that means you've earned his respect. You've learned the lessons from him, both what to do and what not to do. And at some point, you receive the blessing of a father that says you're ready for the world. And, it's the whole idea of initiation.
yeah. And that's a whole thing to go into another topic. But
Yeah.
so many people have already talked about this, but that modern manhood, modern men don't have an initiation,
Right.
and men need it. Women, and this isn't meant to be sexist, but women have always had inherent value because they can have children.
Mm-hmm.
And nature forces them into reality and into the world because they hit puberty, they get male attention.
Yeah.
But at the same time, unlike our modern society, this is what's so backwards. We've been told to think that women were treated like so badly before. It's like you had inherent value. Every society built itself around women to protect women and to keep them safe and to give them prestige because you can literally have children.
Right.
You're the avatar of life I mean, there's a reason pagan, despite whatever we make, think there's a I mean, I saw childbirth in action very recently, and I'm a devout Christian, but I, in that moment, understood the power of the pagan idea of the female divine. Because I
Mm-hmm.
saw my wife giving birth to my son, and there was a lot of people in there. There was me, the midwife, and nurses and all that stuff. But despite all that help, she had to be the single agent to be willing to give her life for this thing that was coming out of her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unbelievably powerful. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, this is the greatest thing she'll ever have to do. I mean great in every sense of the word, great and terrible, And I
Mm-hmm.
understood it. And I had all, like, I could go into it, I don't, but I understood why the divine feminine was such a powerful idea. And in that
Yeah. You
moment,
you
it,
can understand why a primitive culture would make a mother stone mother figure.
exactly. And at the same time, it's the greatest challenge because once it's out, it's like, okay, you've got to be the divine father figure
Mm-hmm.
forever, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and that's that. Like I said, that's a whole other topic, but that's what it is, and it's so easy, I think, for men to drop that role because it's such a heavy burden and it doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say that the mother stops as soon as it comes out of her, but
Mm-hmm. No,
the
because in
a
so many
lot
ways, that's when the work begins.
it is, but it's all
But I know what you're saying
yeah,
too, though.
it's all, but it also means, especially in old cultures, after a woman gave birth, it was kind of like you have your prestige, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Men, now you have to go earn yours based on how your children are and
Mm-hmm.
act. And taking that
Mm-hmm.
away from fathers and taking that away from sons and daughters has been one of the worst things we've ever done as a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why I think our stories don't have it in it anymore.
Right.
But
And,
yeah,
I don't want to chase too much of a rabbit with
yeah, I
this,
don't
and
either.
I don't want to offend anybody with this, but I think it's a valid point. I think that's one of the biggest things. Like when we talk about racism and systematic racism and any of that stuff in our society, I'm very careful to about how much I buy into some of those ideas. But one thing I don't think we can possibly deny is that there has been in the through the past few decades a concentrated effort to put to feed and pour drugs and violence and things into these communities so that we can put black fathers in prison, and it has the effects of that on young black men
Yeah, it's
and
devastating.
on that it's so devastating.
And
And I taught for 17 years in a classroom, and I look at these boys, these young black boys, and that so many of them they do not have a father at home, and they never
yeah,
have, or they had him for a little while, and then he's gone again, and then maybe he's back, and then he'll be and it's the fact that that has happened
mm-hmm.
and almost destroyed
Yeah, entire culture.
an entire culture, and to finally see that starting to reverse is one of the best and most positive things I can say about our society in the past many years, is to see that the growth of good strong fathers in that community again.
Yeah,
And
and
that's not to say that they weren't always good fathers in
no,
the
no,
black
no.
community. That's
I know what
not
you're
what I'm
saying.
saying.
You're actually
But
trying to leave race out of it, which is
right, exactly.
I've had this debate with racists before, publicly and privately. I've met some guys that they want to bring in IQ questions or culture questions, all that stuff, and I'm like,
That's not what it's about.
yeah, on their head, that's what they think, and it's like, look, man, what you don't understand is that this stuff's happening all over the world to every culture,
Mm,
basically. Look at South America; the drugs are so awful. It's not limited to race, and those guys are going to be in for a big shock because that is already moved into predominantly white neighborhoods in America, and it's going to keep going. While fentanyl and
mm-hmm,
all this kind of stuff and
mm-hmm,
everything that's encountered in other demographics is coming. Like, look, man, there's a common problem here, and it's not based on race.
No, it's based
Yeah.
on powerful people who want to stay powerful. And the easiest way for them to stay powerful is to make sure that they wipe out as many fathers and as many strong households, strong families as they possibly can, because good, strong fathers are going to stand up and protect their children from these influences. They're going to stand up and say, you're not doing that in this community. You're not doing that in my home. If they can destroy a home, if they can destroy fatherhood and all of those things, if they can remove that, if they can get rid of masculinity, if they can remove the man who says that I am the line and it stops here and it doesn't, you don't go any further, they can remove that, then you've got a whole generation that they can step in and raise them the way they want to raise them.
Yeah, but all it is warfare. That's what people don't understand. Like, there's nothing new.
It's war.
Instead of an army going out and killing all the men of another army and taking the village, now it's like, well, how do we destroy the men of this army, quote unquote army, without having to fire a single shot?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever, I don't know. I do think that there are. I think it would be hard to deny the totalitarian forces, whatever they are, in particularly in our country, but in the Western world in general, because it's classic warfare, as you just said. It's remove the father, get rid of the men.
Yeah.
Once you get rid of the men, you have the women and children, because they'll go.
And then you're the new man. You make child soldiers of the boys.
Yeah, it's Genghis Khan. You kill all the men, you impregnate everybody. Now everybody's of your lineage.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And fathers are the only thing that keeps societies together.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have a vested interest in their own families, and then ergo their own communities, ergo their own nations.
Yeah.
And once you remove that, it all falls apart. And it's just a sad reality. And of course, there are some bad fathers, but as I said,
of course there are.
It's statistically proven the safest place for a child is with their biological father.
Yeah.
And I think culture needs to. I think the pop culture needs to reflect that. I think that's one of the only ways we're going to see it back in culture, because we kind of craft ourselves to the stories we're told.
Mm-hmm.
And people need those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah. So, happy Father's Day to everybody. It hasn't been the best one for me, but I got to see both of my children and be with them all day, so that's all that matters. And I would love to do a whole talk, maybe I'll do an article on childbirth and the divine feminine, because it really was a great experience. Maybe not for her, but for me.
He said, man, it was fun to watch.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. I wouldn't do it myself. Would not recommend doing it. But we got the comic coming very soon. Josh is knocking it out. It's almost done art-wise. It's already written. We just got to edit it and all that. So there's no missing deadlines. There's no dropping it. There's none of that kind of stuff. Like, it's done. The book is done. The books are coming. We got short films we're making. The game is one level away from being halfway done as of last week. So we're way more ahead than anybody else. Like, no one in comics has given you what we're giving you. You got anything to add to that?
All right, well, just gonna say, as usual, like and subscribe, share, comment. Anything that you can do to get this in more people's ears or in front of more people's eyes, we appreciate it. As soon as we can get this out in a pre-order scenario, we just ask you to go ahead and to do that as soon as possible. We'll let you know when that becomes a reality. But until next time, this has been the Godfoe Universe podcast. Be blessed. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.